Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Yoga Alliance community and friends. My name is Patricia Anderson, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am pleased to join you today from the lands that were once inhabited by the indigenous people known as the Anacostan people. That's here in North America, the United States. We now call it the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I am the executive producer for digital content at Yoga Alliance. I'm actually a consultant to Yoga Alliance. I have my own company. It's called Trishapedia. There's a whole story behind that. We will not get into that today. Would you please take a moment? There's a pop-up on your screen and let us know which continent you are joining us from today. Our team uses that information to try to plan and inform our future content. So behind the scenes this morning, afternoon, it just turned noon here, so I'm going to probably still say morning because it's Monday. Behind the scenes this afternoon is my dear friend, Sybil Valentine, and also a wonderful human whose job it is to caption as I talk, which is not easy. I am originally from New York. We talk fast. And it is Anatomy Week here at Yoga Alliance. Today, we're bringing you a bonus session, actually. Over the past month, we might have started in February. I don't know, March is a really long month. We've had the pleasure of having Chelsea Roff, who is the founder of Eat, Breathe, Thrive. She's brought us a 3-part series on yoga and eating disorders, which has been super fascinating and wonderfully informative, and we are very appreciative of it. And we were both really pleased by the engagement from the audience. And today's audience is mostly in North America and the Caribbean and Europe, Chelsea, just so you know. And so anyway, we thought we would have a bonus session purely for Q&A. So here's how this is going to go. I'm going to give you a little intro to Chelsea, just in case you haven't met her yet. Also, I want to just say this topic in particular can be a little bit sticky for a couple of reasons. One, we want to make sure that you're always staying within your scope of practice as a yoga teacher. So we're here to provide you with information so that you can just have better awareness of what may or may not be going on in your studios, your classrooms, your Zoom rooms where you teach yoga. We want to really encourage you to make sure that you have an appropriate Rolodex of folks that you can refer out your students to if you come upon somebody who is really experiencing some difficult issues. Now there's a bug in front of my face. Such a Monday, such a Monday. But in all seriousness, we want to make sure that you're aware that there is a scope of practice for yoga teachers. And we also want to just say that this can be a very sensitive topic for lots of folks. And we hope that you will take care of your own self during this session. And I think that's my list of things that I have to say. So here's how this is going to go. I'm going to introduce Chelsea. And then she and we kind of chatted a little bit beforehand, and we have a list in our minds of some of the most popular questions. We also have all of the questions that everybody's submitted. So just in case you all are feeling very quiet today and you have nothing to say, which I don't think is going to be the case, we are prepared. And please just feel free, pop your questions in the Q&A. Our job for this next hour is to try and answer as many of them as we can. And I say our job because really my job is simply to ask the questions and Chelsea's is really to answer them. So you have a little bit of background about me. In addition to being RYT 200, I also am a precision nutrition certified nutrition coach, a CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting coach. I've been involved in the fitness community for a long time, both as a consumer and as a trainer, and personally have, for pretty much my entire life of awareness, struggled with eating and food disorder and food addiction. So I have just enough knowledge to be dangerous, but Chelsea is a person who actually has traditional training. She is the CIAYT, the founder and director of Eat, Breathe, Thrive, which is a nonprofit organization that helps people overcome eating disorders. She is a yoga therapist, educator, and research collaborator, and she has spent the better part of a decade working to make integrative health programs available to people who experience mental health challenges. So, welcome back, Chelsea. We're so glad that you're here. And we already have a legit question in the queue, but I'm going to do what we said we would do and start with the most popular questions, if that's cool with you.
That sounds great.
All right, so first, just some defining questions. You all, if you've been here throughout the series, you've heard us refer to eating disorders and disordered eating. So Chelsea, will you tell us what's the difference between those two things, and when might somebody need to seek help?
Yeah, that's a great question, Patricia. And I want to say thank you for having me back. Thank you for being such a wonderful hostess, along with Sybil. I don't know what I'm going to do with my every other Monday now. I'm like, I look forward to this every week, but I'll figure it out, or I'll find some other excuse to come back. Thank you to everyone who's joining us, and thank you if you've joined us on past webinars. They're all available for recording. If you've missed that, if you missed any of them, that is a great question, Patricia. And the first thing that occurred to my mind to me is, it depends who you ask. It depends which lens you through which you view that question. Culturally, discipline-wise, are you asking a medical professional? It even depends, based on what time in history you ask that question. We think about mental illness as these, distinct categories that exist in the real world that never change and shift, right? So eating disorder means this, and that's never changed. And I guess before I answer that question, and I do want to give you a practically useful answer there, I would just offer that these terms, eating disorder, disordered eating, anorexia, orthorexia, body image insecurities, those are all words that we use to describe an experience of suffering and an expression of suffering, and a very particular type. So to me, that's what's common among all of them, is a human experience of suffering that shows up in how they feed or don't feed themselves. It shows up in their relationship with exercise. It shows up in the stories they tell themselves when they look at their own face in the mirror. So there's a lot of commonalities. That said, those terms, eating disorder, and even kind of the subtypes, which we talked about way back in the first webinar, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, ARFID, there's all kinds of, they're useful because they help us to distinguish different experiences and expressions of suffering. And also when that experience that a person is having starts to really interfere with their capacity to continue with their life, whether that has to do with, the behaviors they're engaging in are putting their own life at risk. Maybe with anorexia, they're not eating so much that they're causing themselves, their heart's getting weaker and they're at risk of cardiac arrest. Or, maybe some of those behaviors, whether it's binge eating or purging or over-exercising, is interfering with their ability to hold and sustain real meaningful relationships, which is so essential to one's life. So as I see it, they're all experiences and expressions of suffering. They can show up in a multitude of ways, from under-eating to over-exercising to overeating. And when we start to classify it medically as an eating disorder, and we talked about these again in the first webinar, it's when the level of dysfunction is such that that person, like we start to worry about that person being able to continue with their life. Yeah. And there are physical indicators of that, there are job indicators, social indicators. That's when it becomes an eating disorder, but often it kind of vacillates all over the spectrum for a while first.
So I'm gonna attempt to kind of bring that together in a shorthand, which is an eating disorder is a medical condition.
Yes, an eating disorder is and specifically an eating disorder is a condition we diagnose with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, so used by the American Psychiatric Association. There's one called the ICD that's more international, but eating disorder, at least when we're talking about it medically, is yeah, it's a medical disorder. It's something, and what makes it an eating disorder is it's caused enough dysfunction that we start to worry about that person's life. That's when it goes from disordered eating to full-blown eating disorder.
Thank you. I'm going to move on from that because I think you've expressed it very well. Okay, and then the other one that you wanted to be sure to talk about, because those were my top two. Oh, we were going to talk about restrictive diets or diets at all.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of diets, to be honest, which is somewhat controversial in the yoga community. Yeah, we've gotten a lot of questions from yoga teachers over the past several weeks about diets. And I guess, again, we're using language, right? And language is, I can understand diet to mean one thing, and you might understand diet to be another thing. I'm not a fan of diets because, one, research-wise, we know that people who go on diets are more likely to develop eating disorders, which, you know, can end a person's life. People who go on really severe diets that cut caloric intake below basal metabolic rate, which is how many calories your body needs. There's a study that found those people are 18 times more likely to develop an eating disorder afterwards. So I'm not a fan of them just for that reason. But bigger picture, I think that often in today's society, when a person's feeling vulnerable, we offer a very quick fix to their suffering. So, you know, maybe a person's feeling insecure about their body. Maybe they've put on weight beyond what they had in their past life, and maybe they're feeling insecure about their body, or maybe they're feeling, you know, this is actually causing me physical pain and this isn't okay, and I just need to deal with this. And a diet is offered as, here, this will fix your insecurity. Yeah. This will fix your pain. This will fix all of it. The problem with diets is, one, they very rarely fix the things that we're going to them to you know, diet's not going to take away your insecurity. I deal with lots of people who come to eating disorder treatment. They've gone on a diet. They've lost the weight they wanted to lose, and they still feel just as insecure about themselves. So the idea that fixing your body is going to lead to health or happiness is something worth questioning. They can also disrupt people's metabolism quite a lot. So rapidly changing how much food you're taking in day to day. I know there's, you know, people are a big fan of intermittent fasting, and I'm not saying there can't be value to some of these things. But our body likes stability and homeostasis. And so spending 4 weeks or 6 weeks, you know, just eating grapefruit and then trying to go back to your normal life, often you find your body rebounds back to where it was before. Your metabolism might be severely disrupted. You might be having fatigue and sleepiness and grumpiness while you're on the diet itself. And I mean, it's controversial with yoga people, but I think there's some really big questions we need to ask about diet culture and the corporate interests behind having you believe that your body needs to look a particular way to be valuable, or that this quick 6-week, 8-week, 12-week fix is going to fix your issues. I'm a huge fan of eating for functionality, of eating to take care of your body's unique needs, and not looking, and I'll stop, but I think diets tend to go prescriptively from the outside. Here's what your body needs, or here's what you can do to fix what's going on. I think the lens that yoga gives us is an ability to look internally and to go, am I really hungry right now? Am I full right now? What am I actually needing, you know, in terms of what do I need right now? Is it a nourishing meal? Is it a hug or a connection with friends? So I'm much more interested in building long-term skills to listen and respond to our body's needs and to build a relationship with food from that place, rather than a 6-week or 8-week cleanse to change your body in some way.
Yeah, I hear that. You live next to a park, right? I feel like I hear kids playing outside.
I will close the window.
No, no,
Yeah.
no, no. I think it's great.
Okay.
I'm just acknowledging it. You can leave it be. It's not bothering anybody.
Yeah. Okay.
Just,
Okay. Good. All right. Yeah. It's.
all right. Well, so I know we can dive pretty deep on that, and there are some questions popping up. So I want to get into it. Um, First, I'm going to acknowledge Marissa, who is a registered dietitian, and Marissa's saying that they employ an intuitive eating and mindful approach to help folks heal from eating disorders, yes. Diets that restrict particular nutrients, more specifically, or calorie restrict, are not recommended for eating disorders. And they said, think of it as we honor ourselves on the mat, we need to honor ourselves off the mat through a healthful non-diet approach. So thank you, Marissa, for sharing that and for your kind feedback. We really appreciate it. Related to this, I apologize in advance if I'm getting this wrong. It's either Ida or Ida. How do you help someone who struggles to eat but does not want to receive any type of help? You've talked about this a little bit in your previous sessions.
Yeah. This is a really difficult question, and I think it's hard to hold as yoga teachers, especially because we care so much and we want to help and we want to support. And as Patricia mentioned at the beginning of the session, we also know that we have a scope of practice, meaning that as yoga teachers, our role is not to diagnose medical conditions. It's not to prescribe treatment. And so when you're working with somebody and you can tell they really need extra support and they're not willing to go outside, it can feel really powerless and helpless and scary and heartbreaking. So I think the first thing I would say to the person asking that question is, before I even answer how you work with that person, hold yourself in that. It can be so hard. I know this. I run an organization and we meet people all the time that are in really, really difficult circumstances. And by we, I just got off a call with our facilitators. And so, especially if the person's not wanting help, create some space in yourself to hold what that feels like for you, because it might feel really sad and it might feel really heartbreaking and it might feel really powerless and like, oh, I just want to help and I don't know what to do. The second thing I can answer, and it's not something that you're probably going to find in a textbook or something else, but in my experience, relationship is what heals. Relationship and rapport. And I don't mean that building a relationship with your student is going to fix their disorder, but I mean that a trusting relationship is what might open up the space for that person to be ready to seek help.
Yeah.
So I don't know the particular situation, and there could be anybody listening in all kinds of situations. But in my experience working with people who don't want help, that never shifts until they feel safe, until they feel like they can trust me or whoever it is they're working with, until there's space for them to be completely themselves, a total mess, a total just, you don't even understand how bad and how ashamed I feel. And when there's space for that, sometimes there's a little opening for them to say, I don't want to be in this much suffering. And if they're embraced by somebody who's loving and sees them and can say, I see you, I don't judge you, and there may be a way out. That's my experience. And it can be a hard place to be in. So I guess practically, building rapport and relationship is what I coach our yoga teachers and our facilitators to do. It's using active listening. It's when they're talking to you, hearing what they're saying, noticing your judgment, letting them know that you hear them, reflecting back what they said, communicating that you don't judge them and that you understand them and that you care about them. All of that is the kind of grist that starts to build a relationship where they might go, actually, I think I might need some help.
Showing up and showing up consistently.
Yes, the consistency is key as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's this is another sort of related question. I've had something similar in my head. Where I'm going to take this is the place of yoga philosophy and the idea that ahimsa or non-harming also suggests the need to eat a certain diet, right? Usually vegetarian. And so there's this feeling that there's a feeling within the yoga community sometimes, not everybody, that you're meant to offer that as part of a yoga practice of speaking or advocating a particular path of nutrition, right? Mm-hmm. So what reminded me that I wanted to ask you that was a post from Amy who says, I wonder if you could touch on orthorexia, if there's a prevalence of it in yoga teachers, and how talk of cleanses or clean eating or any type of nutrition information could be potentially harming when you're in the seat of power as a yoga teacher to your students. Amy just says as a note, they messaged you on Instagram about some of their work about this, so just as a point of reference. That was not really a question, really just more like an invitation to keep talking about the same thing.
No, that's really helpful. And Amy, thank you for letting me know. I've been on an Instagram break for the weekend, so I will jump onto my Insta, catch up on my messages. Yeah, I'm glad it is a question you actually asked, because there's a lot there.
Chelsea, sorry, let me just interrupt you real fast with an invitation to remind people what orthorexia is, so we don't.
Yes, exactly.
Make an assumption.
One thing I'll be clear about is that orthorexia is a word that gets thrown around a ton in popular culture and is not a medical diagnosis. So that's one thing to know. It's not in the DSM, it's not in the ICD. That doesn't mean it's not real, or that it doesn't refer to a real phenomenon or a real way people show up in their relationship with food. It just means that the folks at the American Psychiatric Association have not taken that grouping of symptoms and said, based on research, this is a real thing that we can treat in these ways. That's all I'm going to say about that. But orthorexia is a word we commonly use to talk about people that have we talk about an unhealthy obsession with health, particularly in relationship with food. That, again, like that kind of threshold of eating disorders I was talking about, what makes the unhealth, like you might hear that and go, well, how could being, focused on healthy food be unhealthy? That seems the opposite. But it's the obsession or the focus on it can become so much that it interferes with other people's parts of lives. I always think about food as being, yes, physically nourishing, but we also have social relationships, right? So food can be a source of connection. And if your way of thinking about food prevents you from sharing a meal with others, that can be a problem. Emotional, there's all kinds of dimensions to it. So sometimes the focus on physical healthiness of food can get in the way of relationships, from work, from diversity of food, and can sometimes be a veil for something else going on deeper inside. Having said that, I do not recommend that yoga teachers make comments about what people should or should not be eating. It's a very direct, but you're a yoga teacher. And in terms of telling people, these are the foods that are good for you, these are the ways of eating that are good for eating, that's not part of, in my view, our scope of practice. We teach yoga. Now, there are philosophical precepts and ethical ideas, Patricia, that you referred to. Ahimsa, there's yamas, there's niyamas, and that definitely comes into play in terms of our relationship with food, right? Not just in terms of meat or not meat, but where our food comes from. How the humans who were treated that picked that food and got it to the grocery store that you ate it at, any type of harm and any type of environmental harm that went into it. So these are really big ideas. My suggestion to you as a yoga teacher would be to have the humility to know that you're not really in a place to be prescribing how that ethical precept, what that means for that, how that person eats. That ethical precept is a guide that we all individually, I think, should have a relationship with, in terms of exploring how we understand it and what it means for our relationship with food. That might mean vegetarianism. That might mean veganism. That might mean, being very thoughtful about where our fruits and vegetables come from. But I think that you've got to be aware as a yoga teacher of the things you don't know. There may be medical conditions that person's dealing with that affects what they can eat. There may be socioeconomic conditions that affects what kinds of food that person has access to. And so and also they may have an eating disorder going on that makes them hear that through in a way that you can't predict it. So, it's a fairly bold thing to be saying, but on the whole, I don't think as yoga teachers we should be telling people what they should or should not eat, because it's complex. Share those principles. You can share how they've affected you and how they've impacted your own relationship with food from a place of this is how I've understood this. This is how it's shifted my life. But to be, standing on a pedestal shaming someone for what they've been eating or saying that someone else is, it doesn't take into account the complexity of those philosophical principles and the complexity that might be going on inside the person hearing your probably really well-intended message.
It's so interesting I'm really listening and taking into what you're saying. Many, many times at the front of the room, people have asked me what I eat, how I eat. They've asked me about how to lose weight. I've participated in food-based challenges, right? And this is more on the fitness side of things than it is on the yoga side of things, but it's so easy to think that you are helping and so easy to cause harm. So you've really opened my eyes. I thank you for that. That's really important advice, to be very purposeful in the things that you say.
Thank you, Patricia. And also, I think I can sometimes speak so assertively that I guess I would also emphasize I've been in that position too, and had somebody ask a question and just sort of shared, and then after the fact gone, oh, what was that? How could that have been interpreted and all of that? And it can be difficult as a yoga teacher because sometimes people kind of project their own stuff onto you, and they see you as this really healthy, happy, enlightened person, and they're genuinely seeking support for something they're challenged with. So sometimes, just taking a moment to pause and honor that, sometimes when I hear a question, they might say, what should I eat before my yoga practice? Or what kind of diet is aligned with the blah, blah, blah. And I'll have to listen between the words.
Right. Or, one of the coaching tenets is to ask questions. Rather than just give an answer, ask some more questions, get some more information. Yeah. Not always easy, but building that awareness, I think, is something important for us to do.
Agree.
Thank you. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about cueing. This was one of the really interesting things that struck me. I think was this in our session with Catherine or with Maris? I can't remember, or maybe both. I think both. But what are some tips that you have for yoga teachers to adapt their cueing so that we are anatomically specific, but not tying that anatomy to an outcome? Like specifically the core, I think, is one that it's so easy to make that about something that it's not. So suggestions.
Yeah, this is such a good question. I think I might even piggyback on this question because I was going through the questions that had come through on chat, and a lot of the questions that I saw kind of around this topic is what words should I use to not be triggering? What words should I use instead of belly? What words should I use instead of core. I guess first, I commend you for being thoughtful about that at all. Most people aren't. So if you're thinking about it at all, that's a good sign. If you're asking that question at all.
Yeah, the awareness is the first step, right?
Exactly. And I think I'm perhaps controversial in this regard as well. I think that sometimes we can come to our teaching. Language is important. Let me say that. Language is really important. But also sometimes I don't know how to say this without just saying it, so I'm going to try. I think sometimes we treat people, we think that our language is so powerful that we almost treat them as more vulnerable than they are. And we can even, that actually seems a bit disrespectful to me. And this comes up in a lot of trauma-informed approaches. When I hear questions like, what should I say to not trigger someone instead of belly? I've been working in eating disorders a long time. There are lots of words that can trigger people's experiences because we've had lots and lots of different experiences, lots of different types of trauma, lots of things that pull up those past memories and uncomfortable emotions and all of that. And part of my work with people in treatment centers and in these courses is actually kind of going, triggers are part of life. It's gonna happen. And what I want to do here with you right now is figure out how to build your inner resilience, how to build your awareness of triggers so you can catch when you're feeling triggered, catch when you're going, oh, God, that really got me. And it's brought up this memory or this feeling, or my heart's racing out of my chest, or I don't feel okay right now. And then also kind of build the self-care resources and to go, how do I need to take care of myself in this moment? So I'm kind of controversial in that I use the word belly in when I teach, practice. When we do a belly breathing meditation, I use that word. And it's because I know that my clients are going to leave the hospital someday and they're going to come up against that word a lot. So I'm like, I don't want to put you into a safe bubble, and I want to create a space where, we can talk about that. So I may not be answering the question directly. My focus is generally on trying to understand my students' experiences. There's certainly words that I can use that can actually be completely inappropriate and harmful, and I need to be able to understand that and hear that. I'm thinking of like getting the pronouns wrong, right? So if I make an assumption, years and years ago, I did it in a training and I had somebody come up to me and talk to me about it. And that was a moment where I had to go, oh man, I am so sorry I made that assumption. That's different than what I'm talking about around avoiding certain words because they might make people uncomfortable. So I guess I'm not saying language is not important at all, but I'm saying that we might want to consider whether we're sort of people with eating disorders are strong, resilient human beings, and that's what I want to affirm in them. I don't want to go, I'm never going to say the word belly around you because I'm afraid, because I don't think you're strong enough to handle it. I want to understand their experience around it. Does that make sense? Am I just going off on a tangent here? I want to affirm their agency. It's really what it comes to.
It makes great sense. I was more taking you down the path of, there was some great advice about what I would call not turning your yoga class into a fitness class, right? So like if you're teaching asana, like let's, get that 6-pack abs, like stuff like that.
I think I would avoid any type of language or teaching that suggests that we are aiming for their body to be in a different form than what it is right now. So 6-pack, for instance, let's do boat pose so that we can get 6-packs for the summer. That is suggesting that their body having a 6-pack is better than what their body is right now. I avoid any type of cueing like that. When I'm cueing, and I want to say, activate those muscles in your core to support your low back. I think that's okay. Those are like what you know. You can use
That's the important distinction. I think that's really where I think we were trying to go with it. What you said is great, and also this is another piece of it.
Totally, yeah. I think what we want to avoid is suggesting that we're doing yoga to change the form of our body or to get to some higher body. But I would encourage you as teachers to be mindful about how your language is heard, for sure, especially when working with people of different cultures, genders, ages, all sorts of stuff. But also not to, and I know I took it in a different way, but to respect the people that you're working with as humans and respect their ability to, you know, they're a full person. They're not a half person. They may have gone through mental illness, but they're yeah, I sort of rebuff that trauma-informed approach. It's like, never use this language and always use blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, hello, that's a full human. Like they're not, you know, yeah, anyway, that's my own tangent.
Kim has two questions. One, I'm going to ask it even though I'm kind of like, I'm not sure. Kim was asking about osteoporosis, which
yep. Oh, it's a big thing. It's a big thing needing.
Okay, great. I'll let you ask that. Cool. I was like, I don't know, but I'm going to learn something. I'm excited. Obviously, I've already been learning things. And then Kim was also asking about particular styles of yoga, if there are some versus others that are more appropriate for a healing path.
Okay, and what was the specific question around osteoporosis?
What do you do if somebody has osteoporosis?
That's a great question.
I will say, so I wasn't going to say this out the gate, but I will let you know, Kim, we are actually having a specific workshop on yoga for people who have osteoporosis next month. So I don't know if that helps you, Chelsea.
Thank you. I will refer that one. Well, I'll tell you, I'll say first, when I said, oh yeah, it's a big thing, especially folks with anorexia often develop osteopenia, which is right before osteoporosis.
Yes, that makes sense because they're nutrient deprived.
Exactly. So
got it. Okay. Osteopenia
and osteoporosis is big in eating disorders and can definitely present complications in the yoga practice. The way I work with clients is when they're at that point, when they're dealing with osteoporosis and osteopenia, is under the guidance of medical professionals. So I don't go, oh, okay, as a yoga teacher, twists are not okay, forward folds are not okay, all of that sort of stuff. I don't have their bone scans at hand. I don't have the ability to read those scans and understand that sort of stuff. So I consult with medical professionals. So the thing is that osteoporosis is, there's a lot of stages of osteoporosis, so it's going to look different for every client. From a yoga therapy standpoint, I would say work with a medical provider, make sure that person is seeing a medical provider. And if you need to, you might get I get letters of medical clearance sometimes to make sure that they're safe for whatever the practice is that I'm offering. And I describe the practice in detail and make sure that, their doctor has signed off on it. So that would be my suggestion, is think about your scope of practice and work with medical providers if needed. The second question was around styles of yoga that might be more useful and less useful. I think that the yoga tradition is so rich. There's so many practices and styles and approaches that have came from the, whatever we call the original tradition, that have evolved and developed over the year, different practices for different times in the journey. I am not one who says restorative yoga is the only kind of yoga that is good for eating disorders. And that is not, by the way, what the research tells us. There's actually a lot of research coming out showing that physical exercise in eating disorder treatment can actually be critically useful, which used to be
building the mind-body awareness, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the answer is, it depends. To give you some examples, when I'm working with clients, I'm looking at what are the particular things they're struggling with. So if it's really, really bad depression and it's difficult to get out of bed first thing in the morning and it's like lethargy, can't get out of bed all day, we might look at a little bit more active practices, you know, so some gentle sun salutations to get blood flowing through the body, to get heart rate up a little bit, to actually activate the sympathetic nervous system, which gets a bad rap. Versus if I'm working with somebody who is binging late at night, is purging late at night, is dealing with, you know, crippling anxiety, we might be looking at restorative practices, yoga nidra, yin yoga, how these practices can be helpful. And that's just a tiny sliver of, I mean, that's not even to talk about Ayurveda and pranayama and all these different things, but intelligent approach. It's not one style for everybody. It's looking at what is this person dealing with and what practices under this beautiful vast tradition we have might be most useful for that particular thing at that moment.
Well, yeah, and to your earlier point, you know, people with eating disorders are people first. And so just like for you, if you are out there and you don't have an eating disorder, what, you know, you might come to yoga from lots of different ways, or if somebody's coming to you and asking for help, like one of the first things I recommend to people when they're interested to try any kind of fitness and yoga, try different stuff. Like, don't just go once and be like, yeah, that wasn't for me. Like, you've got to find different teachers and different styles and different places. And it might take a while before you find the thing that works for you. And then you're going to change. So that thing might also change.
Exactly. Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Thank you, Kim, for the great questions. Okay, Lynn is asking if you have a student faint in your class and you suspect it's because they haven't been eating, but they have not been forthcoming. What do you recommend that one does in said situation?
Oh, God, it's a great question, Lynn. Thank you for asking it. I point to this all the time, and I think people forget that it actually happens. People think, you know, when I talk about cardiovascular issues and the possibility of fainting in class, I think people think that I'm being over, you know, dramatic about the possibility. So thank you for asking that question. Medical clearance is what I do. So if I'm concerned that there's someone, so to me, if somebody faints in class, something has happened physiologically while that person was in class that I can't see, that I don't understand the full complexity of, that could happen again, that could put that person at risk of hitting their head, of cardiovascular issues, all of that stuff. And so at that moment, I go, I need to know that you're seeing or have seen a medical professional who's aware of this, has looked at it, and I don't need all the details, but I need that medical professional to say that you're safe to come back to class.
Right, because it could be any number of things.
Kinds of things. So I ask for medical clearance. I'll say with folks with eating disorders, there can be a lot of manipulation and kind of secrecy that happens. Rapport is really, really key here. So again, not coming from a punitive place of, you know, you fainted in class and I need you to give me a medical clearance, but usually it's having a very gentle conversation with that person, listening a lot, expressing concern and care. And usually rather than having them bring a form back to me, I might actually write out, this is what I would suggest to you, is write out something that you want a medical professional to sign. And you can, of course, seek legal advice here, but essentially what I'm saying is often medical professionals don't know what's happening in your yoga class. So rather than having...
And you can't necessarily trust the person with the issue to be forthcoming about it.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, there's a few things you can do here. I mean, one, you can get legal advice, that's for sure. There are forms you can use so that you have the ability, and the medical provider has the ability to disclose information and share information as providers. And that's, again, a bigger thing in yoga therapy. But I would want to be very confident that the medical provider knows what's happening in the yoga class, has assessed this person fully, and has given, you know, they're okay that this person is safe to come back to class. That's my suggestion. And yeah, be aware that often people with eating disorders are not fully honest with their medical providers and could just be like, oh, it's a restorative yoga class. So be specific. You know, these are the things we're doing. There are forward folds. It's a heated room. There are standing postures that are, you know, strengthening. So that's what I mean by actually write things out. That way, you know, the medical provider understands what's involved in the yoga class.
I like that advice. All right, Chelsea, we have 15 minutes left. At the moment, there aren't any questions in the queue. Do you want to dive in on your list of things you wanted to chat about today?
Sure. Yeah, I've got a few items here that I pulled from previous sessions. And then I'd also invite you, if you're here and you've got any questions that have come up, please don't.
Oh yeah, please.
There's, yeah, we've got.
I will. I'm unfortunately or fortunately pretty good at interrupting people, so I will.
It's definitely a positive quality, especially when I can go on as long as I can. You know, one thing that has come up a lot, and I'm just looking at a couple, is questions around gender and gender identity. And eating disorders and how those things intersect. And actually, Patricia and I had spoken a little bit about whether, I was like, should we add a 5th webinar to the series about having somebody that doesn't identify as female come on and talk about their own experience? I guess one thing that I've looked at a bunch of the questions. One thing I'd share and say again and again and again is that women, whatever that means, are certainly not the only people that struggle with eating disorders. Eating disorders are experienced by people of all genders, gender identities, gender expressions. Often they are more common in people that are not cisgender and that weren't born into a body that they identify as in alignment with their identity and expression. And you can imagine why. You can imagine why being born into a body that doesn't fit with how society says you're supposed to be, and also doesn't fit with how you wish to express and identify yourself in the world, why you would turn to an eating disorder and why your relationship with your body would be really complex, both with dealing with trauma, changing the shape of your body to fit, you know, all kinds of social norms. And these are just little tidbits. So I think that's one thing I would want to communicate to those of you who are listening and asking around this. When I've worked in treatment centers, I've had people of all gender identities and gender expressions and come into the treatment center. It often depends on the center and the leadership in the center in terms of whether it's a fairly homogenous population in terms of, does that make sense, in terms of ethnicity, age, and gender, or whether you've got a diverse range of people coming in because they see that there's people in leadership that look like them. So I guess I'd offer those things. And I'll repeat something that I've said in previous webinars around this. If you want to create a safe space for people to come and be who they are and feel safe, there should be people in leadership that represent their lots and lots of different identities and experiences and walks of life. And, you know, and that goes for age, that goes for ability, disability, that goes for ethnicity, that goes for gender and gender identity, that goes for all kinds of things. So as yoga studio owners, if you're thinking about how do I create safe spaces, that's the way to do it, is make sure that your teaching staff represents a whole lot of different diverse experiences. And that in and of itself is going to create a space where people feel more welcome to come. I can see there's another question, Patricia.
Yeah, Sherry has posted a really powerful question. Thank you. Sherry says, I have suffered from an eating disorder / poor body image for my whole life. Do you think it's appropriate for us as yoga teachers to share those experiences during a class?
Good question. It's hard to answer from this side, not knowing you, Sherry. I think there's a fine line between appropriate self-disclosure and inappropriate self-disclosure. And that's different in every class, in every setting. And what I mean by that is there's a fine line between sharing something that's relevant in the moment, useful for your students, and isn't just benefits to self-disclosure. It allows you to be human in front of the people you're working with, right? You're not it allows them to feel safe to go, oh, actually, this isn't a perfect person. She also, or he also, or they also deal with mental health issues. There's benefits to it. And then also when I have to look at this as a yoga teacher, a yoga therapist, a speaker, a human being. I have to also think about why I'm sharing it and whether it's important in that moment. Am I sharing it for me? Am I sharing it because I need to get it off my chest? Am I sharing it because it's becoming a really important part of my identity? Am I sharing it to fill the space? Am I sharing it sometimes to hear myself talk? I can be guilty of that. So there's and also in a yoga class where there's not a lot of group processing and things like that going on, I think it can be quite difficult to do it in a seamless, relevant, useful way for your students. Come back to your students. It can be seamless. It can come up really, just offhand, but that's a question you've got to ask yourself. The last thing I'll say here, Sherry, because I see there are other questions too, is I know personally, and I see this with my facilitators, there seems to be these stages of healing. And I remember having an eating disorder. I remember a phase right after that where I didn't want anyone to know that I had an eating disorder, and I felt really secretive about it. And then there was this period that came after where I needed to talk about it. And it almost was like, I wrote about it. I published articles about it. I published a book chapter about it. And it wasn't inappropriate, but it was sort of like I was kind of coming to terms with my own identity. And that sometimes resulted in oversharing. I don't feel totally embarrassed about it now, but sometimes I just was like, oh yeah, also I had an eating disorder, not because it was beneficial to the situation, but because I was trying to figure out that I was still a valuable person having had an eating disorder. Mm-hmm. And then it came to a place of balance where it comes up if it's relevant without shame, without need to share. I'm not sharing to overshare. It's just sort of like, if it's relevant, then it comes up, and it can be a beautiful thing to share with my students. When it's relevant. So I would just say self-reflect and figure out where that is for you. If it's relevant and it's useful, yeah, definitely share it, because sometimes just knowing one other person has it can release shame. And then give yourself space wherever you are in that stage, just to share it with those who can hold it precious with you if you're in one of the tender stages.
Yes. And it can be very powerful. I think a lot of times when you're at the front of the room, people ascribe qualities to you that come from their own minds, right? You may or may not have said qualities, perfection being one of them. And so to be human in that space can be very powerful for your students. Sherry's super excited, lots of exclamation points, really appreciates that answer. Thank you, Sherry. We really appreciate you sharing. So we've got time. I think there's time for these two more questions. Yukiko, I want to thank you for being brave enough to say this. It is super pertinent. Particularly those of us who are newer yoga teachers, there is so much information that we are meant to share and so much information that we're not meant to share. And as we learn and grow, we generally gather more things that we should and should not say. And it can kind of be overwhelming and make you very nervous to get in front of a class, because you're like, I have all these things to say, but I don't know what to say. What if I say the wrong thing? Any suggestions on how to filter all of that and find some peace and just speak the words that you're meant to speak?
So that's such a good question. It's so much bigger than eating disorders too. I love it. Well, I'm like, who am I to say anything about this? But I'll try. Uh, my recommendation is come to the now. Come to now and what's needed right now. So think of teaching like a meditation and come into the present moment and teach to what in that moment. So sometimes it's looking at a student and seeing the tightness they're holding in their shoulders and just saying, you know, you might see if you can allow your shoulders to move down your back. Or it might be seeing that no one's breathing and going, all right, take a deep breath. Or it might be noticing something that's happening in your own body and, you know, grounding your feet on the ground and just taking a breath yourself. It might be a quiet little voice in you that's, you know, going, I think this is not even I think, I feel, and just kind of following it. But that was what my teacher taught to me, is teach to what you're seeing and what you're feeling and what you're hearing and what you're noticing in that very moment. Come to the moment. If you see your teaching as a meditation and you can bring all your attention and awareness into the moment and flow with it, chances are you're usually okay. In my experience.
I love that. And I will add wisdom from the great Maya Angelou, which is when you know better, you do better. So get it wrong. It's okay.
That's true.
So teach, get it wrong, make your sincere apologies if necessary, and do better next time.
Oh, that's so, Matt, and I'm living that this week. It's so true. And be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself when you get it, you know, if you get it wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of the journey of the teachers are students still, right? And so that's part of your journey is so long. My personal opinion of humanity is so long as you are still trying to learn and improve yourself, that's really all you can ask.
Totally agree. Yeah.
All right. Last question goes to Elizabeth. I'm wondering what ideas you have to help those individuals who are over exercisers and may also experience body image disorders. You know, easy question for the last 3 minutes.
Yeah, get that in 2 minutes. I think over exercise is probably under recognized and under treated. I think it's often kind of celebrated in the yoga community. And I think it can be really problematic. It can, you know, exhaust our adrenals. It can do, just speaking of bone problems, it can cause bone problems. It can cause injuries. It can cause loss of weight. It can cause cardiac issues. So my recommendation is actually to recognize that it's a real problem that probably deserves good treatment, whether that's, you know, it depends kind of the stage, but whether it's working with a therapist or working with a doctor. And I know in the periods that I've struggled with overexercise, there's such a balance. And I know, Patricia, you share this a bit working in the fitness industry. Exercise can be a boon to your mental health, right?
Like, yeah, it's a tough thing to moderate because there's so much that feels good about it.
Yes.
Tough.
So it can be such a gift, especially if you're dealing with depression and all that sort of stuff, to be able to go for a run and get, you know, feel so much better after. But usually I think people that struggle with overexercise actually could benefit from learning to be a bit still and learning to see what comes up in the stillness. So I find sitting meditation practice can be tremendously useful and also, you know, infuriating and scary and hard and all those things. Pranayama practices like Nadi Shodhana, like alternate nostril breathing. I love restorative yoga now, but I really struggled with it in my overexercise periods. So I suggest treatment, really good treatment. And then in terms of yoga practice, it's really finding a balance where you can appreciate the gifts that exercise gives you, and then also starting to explore what are the other things my body needs, because it's not always running it to the core. It might actually be deeply restorative stuff, and there may be other, you know, avenues of the practice to explore those things.
Yeah, and I would just add that this is an ongoing challenge, particularly with my fitness clients. And what I have tried to do is just educate people about why the rest is so important, A, and B, what rest actually looks like. So arm yourself with some factoids about both of those things that might help make a difference. Okay, so to wrap up, Chelsea, I'm going to give you the last word. I'm just going to say a couple of logistical things here. Bonnie was asking about the slides. Bonnie, the slides on the recordings for the whole series can be found at yourya.org, and the super awesome Sybil has been posting that link to the chat. I also want to encourage you to visit eatbreathethrive.org. That's Chelsea's organization's website if you're interested in finding some more training and resources around this particular topic. They are a wonderful destination for that kind of content. This has been a continuing education workshop. You can claim credit for this in the teacher dashboard in teaching methodology. We have way more sessions coming up this week. We have a session on the SI joint tomorrow, plank pose on Wednesday. Susanna Barkataki's session continues on Thursday, and then on Friday, we have a session on teaching to Bird of Paradise. It's Anatomy Week, so, you know, lots of anatomy things. And we hope to see you all again soon. Thanks for your kind attention and great questions. And Chelsea, I can't thank you enough for bringing all of this really important content to the YA community. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share, speaking of slides, really quickly.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I forgot you had this slide.
No, it's okay. It's the last one. I'm hoping it goes straight there. There we go. I want to thank you, Patricia, so much, and Sybil, thank you so much. It's been an honor. I don't know what I'm really going to miss these Mondays, so we're going to have to schedule something else soon. I want to thank you all who have participated. As Patricia mentioned, eatbreathethrive.org is the place to find all kinds of courses. I'll mention that we've got a course for yoga teachers called Eating Disorders, How Yoga Teachers Can Help. It's an evergreen course. You can take it anytime on your own time. So that's available. Go look for that. And then I'm teaching, it's essentially our entire curriculum packed into 3 days this weekend. And I think, can you see the discount code? There it is. We're offering—
Ooh, fancy. Look at that animation and everything.
We're offering a discount to anybody on this webinar to come join us at that. If you've got any interest in this topic, it's like everything, yoga and your relationship with food, yoga and your relationship with your body, all of that. If you're looking for tools to help your students, it's a good place to start. Last thing I'll say is we've got virtual campfires where we get folks together around topics of anything related to mental health, from addiction to aging to everything, consciousness, the nature of mind. We do that once a month. It's totally free, and I lead those, and I've got facilitators who lead those. And if you're interested in bringing a yoga program to people with eating disorders, we train facilitators to lead our curriculum, which has now been studied by 2 research studies, and I think there's 5 ongoing. So we're building a good research base. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Sybil. Thank you, Yoga Alliance, for allowing me a platform to get the word out about this work. And thank you so much to everybody who's watching now or in the future for caring enough to spend time learning about this. And I hope our paths cross again at some point.
Indeed, indeed. Thanks so much, Chelsea. Thanks to all of you. Please stay well and keep moving. We'll see you soon.
Bye.